And thanks to everybody. I'm really glad to be with you. I know you're covering the situation closely.
The sudden Russian attack on June the 4th, 2030 caught the American government and pretty much most of the American people by complete and utter surprise and caused a huge amount of shock. In the middle of the country and in the East Coast, massive rains had been falling all month and the dams had got blown up, causing an incredible amount of damage. But the target for the Russian attack was Southern California. The theory was, and China we think initiated this theory, was that if Russia landed enough troops in Southern California, what was left of the American government would fragment and sue for peace. We all know now what the outcome was, but on June the 4th, 2030, a lot of Californians were at the beach enjoying unseasonably hot weather in early June. After 3 years of drone and air attacks, when the air raid sirens went off, they were mostly ignored.
Oh my gosh, what is that?
Captured French, German and Swedish ferries and carriers and boats, and it turned out a lot of Chinese roll-on roll-off ferries, Russia was able to achieve almost complete tactical surprise when it started landing troops. The sudden and terrible attacks on the 4th of June really caused a nightmare for most Americans and most Canadians in most places. The Russian government had made it very clear they were not using nuclear weaponry, and indeed they didn't, but they used about 2,000 old and obsolete ICBMs, which although weren't very accurate, caused an enormous damage when targeted on things like oil refineries and dams. With the help of the Chinese carrier fleet, the Russian Air Force rapidly achieved local air superiority over Southern California. After 4 years of intense fighting every day pretty much, what was left of the American Air Force and Navy and all their National Guard was stretched thin. Very thin. On June the 6th, 2030, Russia landed about 115,000 troops in Southern California. They were met with incredible resistance and ferocity. However, with communication effectively severed with the rest of the United States and Canada, Southern California was on its own. In what was a bittersweet day, on July the 4th, 2030, what was left of the Southern Californian government surrendered unconditionally to the Russians. As the bombs, missiles, drones and ICBMs rained down all around and on Southern California, the population of San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego and Seattle were absolutely smashed, shocked and dispirited. The scale of the death and destruction was on par with World War II. The naval, air and army forces that were in Southern California were overwhelmed, though they kept up stiff resistance until the 4th of July. However, what remained of the depleted air units was sent away and out of Southern California. They were sent to Mountain Home Air Force Base, Hill Air Force Base, to make a stand, to get ready for the next wave of Russian invasion into Americans' heartland.
Keep coming, Glenn, come on! Gotta move back! Come on, come on! John? I don't know. Let's just get back. Get back.
What is it? I just think there's going to be another explosion. Right?
watch me. I thought it was the third plane though. No, the whole top came off. The whole top came off. And then it's all of a sudden I see the smoke fall. I was standing next to the parents, and all of a sudden I couldn't see him. We're under the truck. The top came off. Anthony, let's get the fuck out of here. I'm ready, man. Jason, this is yours. Get off the ice. Look at this shit, man. Can you believe this shit? No. You got a cell phone. Oh, God.
Anybody need some water? I expected 8 by 10 glossy. I know, right? Where are we even going?
We got to get you to the medical station so you can get your eyes cleaned out.
We're not medical station.
100 feet ahead. Everybody goes straight. This ambulance is about 100 feet ahead.
Of course, many people tried to get out of the newly occupied Russian zones. Few managed it. Those few who did get out of Southern California were not treated well by the neighboring states. The damage had been widespread. The hatred of the loss of Southern California was in large degree by a minority of Americans directed at the Southern Californian people themselves. They were deemed to be less American and less patriotic. People felt nuclear weapons should have been used on Southern California. At no time since the Civil War had America been so divided.
They don't know where they're going to be sleeping. They don't know where they're going to be eating. They don't know if they're going to be able to return to the homes that they've left behind. It's a heartbreaking situation for them. The children that you can see playing over there may not be returning to their toys. They may not be returning to their homes. They may not be returning to their schools.
Well, you can see that I'm at one of these schools which has been turned into emergency shelter. There are around 350 people here. So we'll show you around, but basically it's several buildings where people have been put up wherever they can. So there are camp beds on the floor. There are food stations as well. So if you have a look in the main hall here, you can see little gatherings, little clusters of families here. Many of them understandably very upset by what has happened.
Shelves at the local Pack and Save are emptying out. And while there's Kai for all here for now,
got enough in the chiller truck to probably last us about 3 days.
everyone's talking about the state of the roads. When's the power back on? What's happening with the cell phone towers?
John, Christina, a near 450% increase in people camped out on the streets in this one concentrated area compared to this time last year. You may have passed by it or even driven through it.
The elderly President Biden seemed increasingly isolated and out of touch with what American people wanted. The majority of the United States actually sued for peace with Russia. People very much wanted an end to the war without further loss of life or territory. They wanted a resumption of trade. They had suffered so much over the last 4 years, and for what?
Defense issues, including a block on military promotions by Senator Tuberville. What does this say about U.S. military readiness? And would you be willing to talk with Tuberville to try to work out some solution?
I'd be willing to talk to him if I thought there was any possibility of him changing this ridiculous position he has.
Trump, being a clock that is right twice a day, actually attacked Biden and didn't really help with what was going on at the time. At this point, America needed a unified, cohesive government with a firm purpose and an action plan. What it had was two elderly men who both seemingly had lost touch with reality quite some time before the invasion. The reality was, America had lost World War III. Its nuclear threat remained strong. This meant World War III would end with an honourable peace or nuclear Armageddon. For rational people, it seemed pretty clear which of those two should be chosen. After California surrendered unconditionally on the 4th of July 2030, the American government actually started to sign and talk about peace treaties, but it became meaningless as the individual states signed their own treaties. Russia had learnt large lessons from its previous occupations of Europe. They didn't seek vengeance, they sought to make the population better off as fast as possible. The collectivization of the people under a firm government actually really helped people in the states that were occupied, and in the other states that had signed peace treaties with Russia, the influx of Russian goods and food and troops and engineers to help rebuild was warmly welcome. Many of these states had been very unhappy when President Biden was re-elected. Many of those states were very unhappy when Biden almost got killed in London, and most of those states had long since had enough of the idea of American exceptionalism. Clearly, America was not exceptional. While this was all going on, the Russians were digging in and occupying Southern California. They didn't mean to leave. This was their sign to America: sign peace with us, trade with us, accept the world as it is now, or we will continue to fight you. For the truth was, Russia had had enough as well. The war had been very, very long and very, very costly. Even without the influx of the European brigades into the Russian Federation, the army had taken a pounding for the last 7 years. People were tired. People were sick and tired of shortages in the shops, air raid alerts and bombs going off on both sides.
Talking about how we're going to end Joe Biden, stop the invasion, the war with Russia. Bad things are happening for our country. Grossly incompetent as our president, and also the most corrupt president we've ever had.
This area, the Russians firing artillery rockets.
Fred, I do think we see some equipment behind you rolling. In general, look at this if you can.
Hey, John. Yeah, there's a column of main battle tanks that are coming to here. I'd say it's some sort of model of the T-72. You can tell they're rolling past us. I'm going to have to speak very loud because they are obviously very loud as they roll along here. They're rolling past our position right now, and what you can see here is that their tracks are very dirty, so they must have been dug into some field and now sort of switching their positions. They're coming past us right now, and this is really something. We can get close. You can see that their tracks are really covered in mud, so they must have been sort of dug into some sort of field position as they're rolling past us now. And now if we pan over, you can see that those vehicles also, John, are now moving forward. Those vehicles are clearly now moving forward. These main battle tanks, obviously, right now, that is an ominous sign that the Russians certainly are moving some pretty heavy armor.
These are some pictures that were smuggled out of the Russian-occupied state of Southern California in early August of 2030. Life was increasingly going to be miserable for the people trapped under Russian occupation. The Russians were not happy. People kept trying to kill Russian troops. People kept trying to blow up Russian vehicles. Russia reacted angrily. But life in the rest of the United States slowly started to recover. The international trade with China particularly, and Russia and Europe, was welcome. The flow of goods through the ports in Southern California was welcome. It seemed during the incredible hot and wet summer of 2030 that World War III had never been declared, but had been fought and now was at an end. The United States of America had been defeated. The United States of America as an organization was much diminished. The United States was definitely no longer the world's superpower. The United States was no longer even a superpower. The two superpowers now were Russia and China. Well, thank you. This is, of course, a fictional series, and I'm doing it to try and show what life actually would be like under occupation for Americans, because most Americans can't cope with that, and most Canadians can't either, but it's something we should take on board. There is lessons from history to be learned, and we're going to learn them. And one of those major lessons of history for the Americans is that when things get really, really bad and people are unfair to people, Canada gets mad. Next week. So despite my best intentions, I got conscripted. So I'm a medic in the whole regiment. It's a little upsetting because I don't really speak much French. I guess I'm going to have to learn. We're using old repurposed tanks and a couple of smatterings of new ones. And the idea is that we're going to go into America and liberate the Russian-controlled areas, because we figure if we don't, they'll come and get us. Toodles. This has been a 2023 Wolfie Terrier and Gatineau production.